Welcome to the Bettis Musgrove Show, the podcast where personal injury legal expertise meets real-world advice to empower and protect you. Join us as we delve into the critical aspects of personal injury cases, break down legal jargon into actionable insights, and share essential safety tips to help you navigate life's unexpected moments. And now, here are your hosts, Spencer Bettis and Ben Musgrove.
All right, welcome to episode number 3 of the Bettis Musgrove Show. As always, I'm Ben Musgrove. This is my partner, Spencer Bettis. We have Bettis Musgrove Injury Law Firm here in Cumming, Georgia. We're a boutique law firm specializing in personal injury. Last week, we came to you and we talked about the 3 biggest misconceptions as we see it in personal injury law. We talked a lot about insurance. In last week's episode, we talked about the different buckets of insurance and where people can go look. We talked about coverages for automobiles, properties, got into health insurance a little bit. We spoke on insurance and how it's the source of a vast amount of personal injury claims or the recovery in personal injury claims. And then we gave some examples of where the different types of insurance come from and how hiring the right attorney can better ensure that you're protected and that they check off those buckets so that your personal injury claim can be successful. To follow up on that, Spencer and I thought that we would kind of go behind enemy lines, so to speak, and hear about the other side of the insurance world, and we would bring in a, quote, good neighbor to talk to you guys today. So without further ado, introduce our guest, Clint Smith. Clint's a good friend of mine. He is a fellow Forsythian, a fellow West Georgia alumni. He's a Georgia Bulldog fan.
Go Dogs.
Yep. We both served together in the Leadership for Side class a couple of years ago. And above all else, Clint's a local businessman and the owner of his own State Farm agency. So and you might see his Jeep driving around too. He's got a nice, pretty red Jeep with his face on the side of it.
That's right.
So check out Clint when you get a chance. But I'll pass it over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, where you came from, and why you do this.
Yeah, so my name's Clint Smith. State Farm agent here in Cumming. I've been an agent now for about 9 years. Been with State Farm for about 13 years. I grew up in Marietta, went to Pope High School, go Greyhounds. As Ben mentioned, I went to West Georgia, double majored in finance and accounting, and always wanted to kind of be my own business owner. Didn't really know what that looked like, but I just knew that I wanted to do something where I could work for myself, and so that's kind of how I got to be where I'm at now.
Well, we thought we'd do a little Q&A for you.
Yeah.
Something that our viewers might like to see. So first question is other than being required to maintain insurance to drive a car, why do people need insurance?
I mean, you need insurance for a lot of reasons, but the biggest thing is probably going to be for, protecting yourself against any sort of, damages you cause or somebody causes to you, whether it's, to your car, to your house, to, injuries to yourself. I mean, the list goes on. So it's always important to carry the insurance for that.
Yeah, absolutely. If insurance is going to cover a claim and someone's not personally responsible, why carry more than the state minimum?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So this is where I think this is where people get a little confused, because what we always hear is, everybody will call and say, I need full coverage. Okay, well, full coverage to an insurance agent is going to be a lot different from what a consumer thinks is full coverage, because full coverage to us is comprehensive collision and rental reimbursement. So really the collision part of it is if you were to cause damage to, someone else's car, to your car, the collision is what would pay out. But you could still have state minimum insurance liability limits with that full coverage. So we always try to, educate our customers and let them know that full coverage does not mean that people think they're just fully covered for anything and everything. And it's not always the case. And that's where having somebody who can talk through options, explain what it means, can really make the difference.
Yeah, just to recap on that, state minimum being $25,000 for an automobile, you're saying you can have $25,000 worth of coverage and still be fully covered?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest problem with what we're dealing with right now, because it's been that way for a very long time. And, I mean, we've all experienced the last 4 years of price increases with everything.
Yeah.
And yet there hasn't been any adjustments on that side of it. So it's a little concerning going that route.
Yeah. So it sounds like you probably advise people to carry more than $25,000. I certainly do whenever I'm talking to somebody about it. My sort of go-to number, and you may disagree, is $100,000. I think is kind of just a good starting spot. Can you tell us, I mean, generally speaking, obviously, because I know there's different things that apply, but what would a premium look like on, say, $100,000 versus just the state minimum at $25,000?
I mean, that's the crazy thing. So it's hard to put a real number behind that because everybody, and we hear this all the time too. Well, my neighbor pays, $100 for this, this, and this, and I'm over here paying $150 for this, this, and this, and why am I not paying what they're paying? And the truth is everybody qualifies for their own individual rates based off there's a lot of things that go into it, but for the most part, everyone is getting their own rates based off who they are. But roughly saying, if I had to put a number next to it, you're only talking about $10 to $20 probably more a month.
Okay, for $75,000 more.
Exactly, and I think $100,000, to your point, would probably be like the starting point I would feel most comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I mean, keep in mind, if we were having this conversation, 10 years ago, $100,000 for property damage would cover, if you totaled a Tesla.
Right.
Okay. Well, now every new car coming out in this market is over 100,000. Yeah. So even at the 100,000 mark, you're still setting yourself up potentially to be on the hook for something that is going to be worth more than that.
Sure. You and I talked about it when you got here this morning, but I saw the news article or news story maybe last night or night before where they're saying that premiums are going up just because the cost of cars are going up and the cost to repair those cars with sensors, computers, and everything else is so much more expensive. So I think that plays into the increasing it to $100,000.
I mean, 100%. I mean, used cars are up 40% right now. And again, we kind of touched on this, but, a lot of that's to be because of COVID. China shut down their country during COVID time, and what that ended up happening is they created this whole chip shortage, globally. So all these new cars were just sitting there not getting worked on. And so these dealerships were having to buy used cars to make a profit. And so it drove up supply and demand. And now we're seeing used cars 40% more than what they were just a couple of years ago.
I think a lot of the things that Spencer and I see too is people ask us, well, why would I even, if they're just going to pay the $25,000 on this claim and then I'm not going to owe anything, why would I carry more? And what I tell people more often than not is, look, yeah, $25,000, they may pay that out for you if that's all you've got. But then let's say the person that you hit has a claim that's worth $250,000 and they have to go access their UM insurance. That UM company is going to come look to you to pay that extra back, even though State Farm paid out your $25,000. Do you see that ever, and how do you advise people in terms of what to look for there?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question right.
Yeah.
If someone has state minimum and they get into an accident, they're at fault?
Yep.
Why they should have more than that?
Well, so the way we see it oftentimes is, let's say somebody's at fault and they've got $25,000 in minimum coverage. The claim is worth $200,000.
Yeah.
So then we will go file the claim. We'll get the $25,000. We'll then proceed against the UM company to get the UM money. A lot of times the UM company will then come and sue the at-fault driver to recoup that money they had to pay out.
Correct.
That seems like a good reason to carry more than just the $25,000, so you're not subjecting yourself to that potential exposure.
That or, that's a lot of trust in somebody else. What if they didn't have uninsured motorist coverage?
Right.
Or here's an even harder question to ask. What if you killed them?
Yeah, exactly.
So we're not dealing with just someone, who's going to have 25,000 in injuries. We see a lot of crazy things, and medical expenses are up. So
we talked about that last week. I mean, $25,000 by the time somebody takes an ambulance to the hospital and gets an MRI, they've blown $25,000.
They've already blown it, yeah. Or let's say they had to get Helivac.
Yep. We got one yesterday, Helivac from Macon to Augusta, $78,000.
Yep. And that's just to get there.
Yep.
And that's not including any of the follow-ups for PT, chiropractic. I mean, you name it. So I tell people all the time, look, you can go the state minimum route if that's all you can afford, but just know you are setting yourself up for a lawsuit.
Sure. And I think that's a good segue into the next topic being underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage, because I don't think nearly enough people carry it. And if they do, I don't think they carry the right kind or enough of it. And MedPay for that matter too. What can you say about UM coverage?
I think UM coverage is probably one of the most important coverages to have. And so those who don't know what UM stands for, it's uninsured motorist coverage. So it's going to cover you for three main things. It's going to cover you for somebody who doesn't have, if somebody hit you and they were at fault, they didn't have active insurance. It's going to cover you if they hit you and they had state minimum and it wasn't enough coverage to cover the damages that they caused to you. And also hit and runs. So super important to have. Crazy statistic for the state of Georgia is 1 out of every 4 drivers at any point in time is driving uninsured.
I did not know that. That's crazy.
Yeah. It used to be 1 in 6, but the data is now it's going to 1 in 4.
Yeah. I mean, we see it a lot.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier, it happens more often than not that somebody thinks they have insurance, or they give the cop during an accident, they give them their insurance card that comes back as valid. Turns out they didn't pay last month's premium, so they've been dropped, and now they're not insured.
Yeah, and people are, we hear it all the time. Well, that won't happen to me. Nothing, I'm okay. I'm all about stories. So, quick story: had a customer Christmas Eve over at some family's house in Canton, coming back to Cumming on Canton Highway. Him, his wife, 2 kids were in the back seat. It's a 2-lane highway, right? Mm-hmm. Late at night, and the other driver had worked an all-night shift. It was like a Black Friday all-night shift. Fell asleep at the wheel and hit them head on. And every single one of them had to get hospitalized. And his wife and daughter were in the hospital for like over 30 days.
Oh, wow.
Well, the driver that hit them died. And it was a crazy situation because we didn't know like what coverage he had and what that was going to pay for their injuries. Luckily, the guy who hit them was smart enough to have $25,000 in bodily injury per person.
Right.
So it helped out a little bit, but still, the devastation from that is, it's real.
And if they don't have UM to kick in, then they're
exactly
left holding the back.
And then you're pretty much on the hook for that medical bill, which isn't fair to begin with.
Absolutely. We talked about last week too. One of the biggest complaints we get is I don't want to use my UM coverage because it's going to make my premiums go up. And no matter how many times I tell them it's not supposed to make your premiums go up, people don't want to hear that. Yeah. Maybe from a State Farm agent, they'll believe me. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I can only speak on behalf of State Farm. I cannot speak in regards to other companies because other companies will make your rates go up, even in non-at-fault accidents. But as far as State Farm goes, uninsured motorist coverages do not go against you. The only thing that is surchargeable or can go against you would be any at-fault accidents that you cause.
Perfect. So there again, if you have UM coverage, you need to use it, at least in State Farm's case, according to Clint. It's not going to make your premiums go up. So feel free to use that UM coverage. And then also what we hear a lot is, well, say I've already had a roofing claim this year and my daughter already had a wreck. If I file this one on my UM, that's going to be 3 claims in a year. I don't want to lose my coverage. Is that something people should be worried about for using UM?
I mean, trending in claims, I guess, could be a concern, but uninsured motorists, or comprehensive, we call these like act of God, right? There's nothing you could have done to prevent that, so you're not going to get penalized for it.
Perfect. I love that. Spencer, you got any here?
I did want to point out with the MedPay real quick, if we could. That's another super important coverage I think everybody needs to carry. We hear it all the time. Well, I have health insurance. I don't think I need this coverage. And while I would agree, it's great for that you have health insurance. The way you can use your medical payments to really kind of help you out is have your medical payment coverage the same limits as what your health insurance deductible is. That way, if you or anybody in your car is injured, let's say you haven't met call it a $5,000 deductible for your health insurance that year yet. Well, your medical payments is going to kick in first and pay whatever, it's going to be. So now you've satisfied that deductible. And now any sort of doctor follow-ups or any sort of PT or chiropractic or whatever the case is, it's all going to be paid for because you've already reached your deductible. So it's an easy way for you to not have to pay anything out of pocket, and you get a vehicle safety discount for having it.
There you go. And every instance where we have somebody that has MedPay and also has health insurance, I encourage them to use their health insurance. Obviously, you get a better rate just based on the contractual rate with the doctors and the insurance companies,
right.
But then we can use that MedPay, like you said, to satisfy any subrogation interest that may come up from the health insurance company. And it's a beautiful win for the client. Didn't cost them any extra money,
yep.
And everybody kind of walks away getting paid, including the doctors. So it's awesome. I did forget to touch on, it's kind of related to UM, is do you advocate for umbrella policies?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We call it the lawsuit protector.
Yeah.
Obviously in this industry, we have injury attorneys that we get some calls from time and time. But the umbrella policy is probably the most important one to have on top of everything else, because in the event you were to be sued by somebody, whether it's in the car, on your property, or whatever the case might be, if somebody would try to sue you, whether they were right or wrong, anybody can sue you in the state of Georgia. You still have to go to court, even to try to get it dropped. But, this policy would help protect your auto, your home, your income, your retirement. A lot of people don't know that in the state of Georgia, if somebody were to sue you and you had to pay them back a certain amount and you didn't have that money, they can actually garnish your wages up to 20% until it's paid back.
Yeah.
So the umbrella policy is super important because it's designed to kind of help protect you from losing all of your major assets. And the cool thing about it is it covers all of your legal costs too. So it's a win-win, and it's going to protect you, again, from anything and everything.
Yeah, I think of a case several years ago. I represented a family. Their little boy was over at a friend's house, and they were riding four-wheelers and didn't have helmets on and shouldn't have been riding the way they were. And unfortunately, the little boy that we represented fell off the four-wheeler underneath it, and it killed him. But the parents that owned the four-wheeler, they had their homeowner's policy kicked in a little bit, and then they had an umbrella, and they were able to really help out the family of the little boy that died. And had they not had that, I don't know how anything would have gotten paid. And another situation where there was air evac and all these medical bills that came from it, and it just was impossible to get them any kind of resolution, especially considering the loss of their child. But the umbrella definitely kicked in and helped.
100%. I mean, any parents that have kids, we're talking to them about if you have kids and their friends are over on your property, if that kid were to trip and fall and break an arm or something else crazy like that happens, you need an umbrella policy because you just don't know what you're going to be up against, what you're dealing with, and it's better to be protected and know you're protected than worrying about what's going to happen next.
So this is a big issue that pops up in a lot of our cases, a big factor, something we have to look into. But when somebody purchases an insurance policy on a vehicle, who and what is typically covered by that policy?
It's a good question. Again, I can only speak on behalf of how State Farm does it, but when someone buys insurance on a vehicle, that coverage is following the car, not the driver, unless you're dealing with like a rental car, if that makes sense.
Okay.
A lot of times State Farm, we will cover, even if it's, we're probably one of the only companies that allows permissive use too, right? So again, that's if someone is not technically listed on the policy for whatever reason, maybe it's a sibling in town who's just visiting for the holidays and they took the car out to go to the grocery store and got into an accident, we're covering that regardless because, again, we're insuring the vehicle and that driver was given permission. Again, can't speak on other companies, policies because that's not the case in some instances, but with us it is.
Okay. And then would you say on UM policies, a lot of times that will cover individuals in the household as well that may not necessarily be as part of that policy?
Anybody inside the vehicle.
Okay.
And same with medical payments. It's per person, per passenger. And again, to kind of touch more on that, we have conversation with the grandparents and, they're like, well, we're fully covered because, we got, Medicare. It's like, okay, well, do you ever drive your grandkids around? Do you know what type of health insurance their parents have? So again, it's always important to make sure you're just covered across the board. That way you don't have to, stay awake at night worrying about what you're not covered for.
All right, so here's a chance for a little self-plug. Outside of maybe pharmaceutical companies and personal injury attorneys, I think insurance companies advertise as much as anybody. What is something that somebody should look for when they're looking for an insurance agent?
But the number one thing that comes to my mind is an educator. If you're talking to an insurance company and they're just trying to find you the cheapest plan possible, while I think price is important, I also think quality is more important. And so you need to be finding an insurance agent that is taking the time to go through line by line, explaining all the coverages of what you have and how it works, giving you real life examples of how that works, and then trying to get you the biggest bang for your buck. Because, let's be real. I get, everything is very expensive nowadays. You can't even go to the grocery store without, spending $100 on a piece of chicken.
Or 400.
Or 400. Yeah, that's more like the Costco trips. But, but you really need somebody who's looking out for you. And that's where like a State Farm agent comes in handy because, some people will go the independent agent route, which is fine, if that's how they want to do it. But the difference between us and like them is they're going to have access to a lot of smaller companies, and those smaller companies are not always going to be as financially strong as like a company like State Farm. So, I think it's important to be with a reputable company, It's kind of like the example I always ask people. I'm like, where do you shop for groceries? Is it Publix, Kroger, or Aldi's? And I'm not dissing Aldi's, but there's certain brands, right? Do you fly Delta, Southwest, or Frontier? Like, you could not pay me to get on a Frontier plane. It's just not happening. Just say $50. Like, no, I want to get there in one piece. So the company matters and the agent matters, and I think that's where State Farm really comes in handy.
I'll say this, Frontier, if you want to sponsor the podcast, certainly we'll fly Frontier.
I'm more of a Delta guy. So we'll get more into the legal-related portion now. How often is an agent contacted when someone's been in an accident?
Every day. Yeah, so it's crazy. I love it because, some of our customers, when they get into an accident, before they even call the police, they're calling us. And then, again, that's where being an educator comes in handy, because then we're giving them instructions like, okay, is everybody okay? All right, don't worry, go ahead, hang up with us, call the police, take photos, exchange driver's information with the other driver, take pictures of their insurance card, and for whatever you do not admit fault, and it even says that on the back of people's ID cards, gives you a little breakdown of what to do in the event of an accident. But yeah, we get calls about that every single day.
And y'all often recommend they get a police report associated?
100% there's a few things I always recommend. One of which is always get a police report, even if it's a little fender bender or, there's no scratches. It's a crazy world out there right now. I mean, we've had people who barely scratched a car in a parking lot, and even though a parking lot's considered private property and police can only do so much, they can't really determine somebody was at fault. We've had people who didn't call the police, and then the person that scratched them, or they scratched them, and it was minor damage, are now coming in with a wheelchair and a neck brace. And I'm telling you, it's crazy. And I've seen it firsthand. And that's why I'm like, call the police, get a police report, even if they can't even help you, even if there's not damage. Because what that does is it creates a time and place, and there's a paper trail that you can use as reference. And then probably the most important thing to have, and I recommend this to anybody and everybody, is get a dash cam. Because a dash cam does not lie. And a police report is your story against the other person's story. And, insurance companies are going to represent their customers to the fullest unless it's just obvious that they were at fault. And if you have a dash cam footage showing exactly what happened, nobody can argue against that. So I think that is the best $100 investment anybody can do for themselves.
Yeah, that actually segues into a question we had coming up. So we were reviewing some footage yesterday from body cam from an accident, and the at-fault driver mentioned that they had a dash cam, and we're certainly going to be looking into that. Does having a dash cam help with a premium at all, or can it help lower a premium? Is it beneficial to have, other than what you said already?
I wish it gave a discount, but for me, it's like, I drive around in my Jeep. And so I don't want anyone coming back and saying I cut them off, because I'll be like, all right, well, let's look at the footage, because I know I didn't cut you off. So it might not give you a discount, but that's going to give you the biggest peace of mind that any type of insurance can give you.
Yeah, it could be helpful or harmful to claim, depending on what it says or what it shows. Outside of what you talked about already, what kind of role do agents play in the claim going forward?
So again, this is strictly for State Farm. I cannot speak on behalf of other companies. Again, the main difference between us and like an independent broker would be, when you're dealing with a claim, you're going to be dealing with us in our office directly, and we can get as involved as you need us to. Obviously, we like to respect the claim department and their duties, and we will let them handle it as best they can. But, if anyone's ever, having a hard time getting somebody back on the phone, whatever the case is, or if they need help uploading stuff or just really need help knowing like what the next steps are, we're there every single day. I mean, we deal with claims every single day of telling our customers like how and what to do to help keep the claim going.
Perfect. And you touched on a bunch of stuff there about things that people can do to sort of help themselves in the instance they're in a car wreck, pictures, police report, that type of thing. Yep. What are some things that people need to be aware of not to do so that their insurance claim isn't denied potentially?
Well, the first thing you want to do is make sure your insurance policy is paid.
Yep.
Because, coming back to that statistic, 1 out of every 4 drivers is uninsured. If I was a betting man, I'd say half those people don't even know they don't have coverage at that point. And again, times are harder for some, and so we see where people can only pay when they can pay.
Right.
So we always just tell them, look, you got to do what you got to do. I don't recommend going 7 days without insurance, but if you do, I would probably recommend not driving the car anywhere if you can, if you can avoid it. And then also, again, State Farm, we're a permissive use company. So if you're giving someone permission to drive your vehicle, they're going to be covered if they got into an accident. Just know if you're not with State Farm, you might want to check with your insurance company, because it is possible that if someone who's not listed on your policy gets into an accident, that is an easy way for them to deny coverage. So you definitely want to check that out. And then also, probably the next biggest thing is insufficient coverage. We touched on state minimum, and state minimum does not get you far at all. It didn't get you far 10 years ago. It's definitely not getting you anywhere in today's world. So just make sure you have proper coverage in place. Make sure you review your policies every year, because life changes, needs change, card changes, so pricing changes. So I highly recommend always reviewing your policies. Always know what you have. That way, if a claim ever arises, there's no surprises.
Yeah. A couple of things I'd like to add to that, too, is also if you don't have car insurance, you could potentially go to jail. I mean, if you get caught driving without car insurance, or somebody driving your car without it.
The law.
Yeah, so don't do that.
Don't do that.
Also, make sure, like you touched on earlier, somebody needs to report the accident to their agent or to the corporate company as quickly as they can after an accident. And if you're going to be served with a lawsuit, and you know that the sheriff's knocking on your door, or private process server's knocking on the door, don't avoid service. Take the service, and then immediately call your insurance company and let them know you've been served. They're going to defend you. There's no need in trying to evade that. We're going to find you eventually. So just go ahead and comply. That way they don't say, well, you failed to comply with your policy, so we're not providing coverage anymore.
Yeah, and the last thing you want to do is get pulled over for not having active insurance, just to come to find out your registration was suspended because you didn't have active insurance.
Yeah.
And then there's a $65 fine you didn't pay, so now they're towing your car and they're taking you to jail.
Yep. Well, I think that's a pretty good close. Just to sort of tie it all up, is there just one big piece of advice you would tell people to do or not to do?
Don't choose insurance over the cheapest plan. I cannot stress this enough. Obviously, you got to get what's in your budget, but go with a reputable company and make sure you can get as much coverage as you can afford, because insurance is not just for you, it's for your loved ones too. And so going the cheap route is only going to cost you more money in the long run. So go with a reputable company, make sure they're financially stable, and make sure you can get as much coverage as you can to protect you and your loved ones.
Awesome. Well, Clint, I really appreciate you coming in and joining us. I know it was kind of short notice, but
thank you for having me.
I think we covered a lot of stuff. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and your agency?
Yeah, so you can find me online, coveredbyclint.com. Again, I'm a local agent here in Cumming, Georgia, and you can always look out for the big red Jeep.
Yep, the big red Jeep, this bright smiling face on it. Yeah. And otherwise, we're Bettis Musgrove. Again, you can find us at bettismusgrove.com, on all Facebook and Instagram at Bettis Musgrove. And then give us a call if we can help you, 470-839-2769. Thanks.